Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today, Michael, to do some fun crafting. We are going to be making our very own construction or cardboard gingerbread house garland. So you can see our little garland here. You can make yours as big or as small as you might want. So you can do as many little houses. We're going to make at least a couple together today and go through all the steps of how to make your own and string your garland. And you can get as creative as you want. So you can add lots of fun details with paint and glitter and sequins or whatever else you might have in your craft box at home. So I'm going to go through all the supplies that you're going to need and we'll get started. So to make your own little gingerbread garland, the first thing you're going to be using is cardboard. So I've got some scraps just from boxes. If you don't have cardboard, you could use construction paper instead. It will be a little bit of a thinner material, but you could definitely use that if you don't have cardboard. But you could use any sort of piece of a box. The lid of a pizza box works great as well. Any shipping boxes that your parents might have gotten lately, you can definitely tear those apart. And we'll be using these little house templates to make our house shapes. If you haven't printed out your templates or you didn't want to use a template today, you can definitely draw your own little house shape. Or you can print these out and we're going to cut these out and use these as our templates to trace. In addition to cardboard, we are going to be using yarn to string our garlands together and our plastic Creatology needles to do that, as well as a hole punch. So this is going to be the way that we're going to string all of the garland together, each house, to make it into a little garland. And as an option, I have some wooden beads here from Michael's that you can use to string on the garland as well, but that's totally optional. You don't have to add beads if you don't want to. And then, of course, we're using paint. So I have my Creatology acrylic paint. The main color that I'm using today is going to be white paint. As you can see, all of our little gingerbread houses have a white border as well as lots of white detail to look like white icing on a gingerbread house. And then you can also do additional details like trees or doors or any other paint colors you might want to do. So paint and some paint brushes, as well as some glue and some glitter. And I have some optional sequins here, all different little fun colors of sequins. I have some Chenille stems or little pipe cleaners. I have some embroidery thread to do some little mini ribbons or to make a tiny little wreath. You can also use additional glitter glue or glitter glue pins. So these are all options to decorate your gingerbread houses however you might want to. So primarily all you're going to need is cardboard and paint and scissors. Those are going to be the main things that we're going to use today in order to customize your gingerbread houses in a million ways. And so I'm going to go ahead and flip my camera around so you guys can see all of the steps. If you have any questions as we get started, if you want me to repeat some more of our materials or have some suggestions, go ahead and put that in the Q&A, of course, and we can come up with some options together. All right, so I've got my little garland here, as you can see. So I'm going to set that aside for now so that we can start making a brand new one together. So I've got my little templates here all printed out, and I'm going to cut these out first. So using my scissors, I'm going to just cut along the black line. And as I mentioned at the beginning as well, you don't have to use a template if you either didn't print one out or you chose not to. You can draw any style house that you might want. These you can make as many as you want as well. So if you wanted to do similar in length to the garland the sample garland that you all saw, that has 6 houses. So I have 2 of each style house, but you don't have to do that many. or you can make it much larger if you want to. And if you are drawing your own little house shapes, as you can see, a couple of these do have like a little chimney addition. Those are a fun little thing to make it look like a little winter cabin almost, but again, you don't have to add those. And then my houses are about 6 inches long or tall, and then about 3 to 4 inches wide. And again, you can make yours different sizes if you want to, but just in case you wanted to go ahead and make it a similar size if you are not using a template. Okay, we're going to cut out our third little house here. You also don't have to do different style houses. So maybe you like one of these templates, but you don't want to use all 3. You could just cut out your favorite one and then do multiple houses, all the same shape, but decorate them all differently. And since we are crafting together for a limited time today, we're definitely going to do at least one of each style house together and then go through how to string a garland. But you can continue crafting and doing different details and designs on your own if you want to make more houses than that. I think these little gingerbread houses are a fun holiday craft, regardless if you want to make a garland. They'd also be a really cute card, so you could make them on construction paper instead of cardboard if you wanted to, and that would be a fun little holiday card or turn it into an ornament. Okay, so now that we've cut out our templates, we're going to trace them onto our cardboard. And as we get ready to cut the cardboard, it is a little bit hard to cut sometimes. I'm using my little Fiskars scissors that I found in the Creatology aisle at Michael's. So they're great for little hands, but they also cut really well. But you might want to ask an adult for help if you struggle as we get started cutting, but also just take your time. We're going to be patient and do it together. Okay, so we're going to start with tracing our house first. So I'm going to take my marker and just draw right along the edge of the house template. And you can use a marker or a pencil for this step. There's my first little house all traced. And then I'm going to trace my second house. Again, you can trace multiple of each style if you want to. And then we'll grab this extra sheet of cardboard here and do this last one. Again, I like the thickness that cardboard adds to this and makes your houses feel a little bit more substantial. They're not quite as thin as a construction paper might be, but if you are using construction paper, you can still do all the same steps, just a different material. Okay, so now that I have one of each style house traced here, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut into the cardboard and just cut right along the line. As you can see, as I start to go in further, what I like to do then is kind of bend the cardboard away. And then it gives you a little bit easier to get your scissors back in there to cut some more. And also come back from the other side and cut back down. And sometimes it can be a little bit challenging. You just want to press pretty firmly to try to cut through the cardboard and then just take like little bites with your scissors. And there you have our first little house cut out. And then our second one here, we're gonna do the same thing. And some cardboard is thicker than others, so yours might be really thick and be a little bit harder to cut through. Again, just kind of bend the cardboard as you cut. You can always come back through at the end, and if you have any little scraggly bits or pieces of cardboard you want to come back through and kind of trim up, you can do that afterward as well. You can see I'm just kind of pressing firmly and taking little bites. So it takes a couple of tries, but with just the edge of my scissors, getting it in. And if I can cut it away from it, the other pieces, it helps even more. There, I've got my second little house cut out there. And like I said, you can come back through and see if there's any little bits that you want to cut away. Sometimes parts of the inside of the cardboard start to kind of come out and clean up your edges a little bit. Once all the excess cardboard is removed, it becomes a little bit easier to clean up all your lines. All right, so we've got 2 of our little houses cut out. And we're going to cut out our third one here. All right, and we're almost done with the cutting of the cardboard for our first 3 that we're making together. As I said, you can make as many houses as you want. The garland that I made for the sample one that we all saw has 6 houses on it and is about altogether about 6 feet long once you hang it up. So it depends on how long you want your garland to be. Also, you can do, when we string them all together, you can string them closer or further apart to make your garland longer. This would also be a cute garland to put even on a tree or hang it in your window. Okay, so I've got little cardboard bits all over, as I'm sure you do at home as well. I'm going to clear all that out of the way. And you should have multiple little houses here. So I've got 3 different shape houses, and we're going to start painting them next. So again, I'm using my Creatology acrylic paint. You can use other types of paint as well. Watercolor is not always the best on cardboard. It takes quite a bit for it to show up. So that I wouldn't probably recommend that. But you could also use markers if you don't want to use paint. You could use a paint pen as well, or yeah, any markers. You could just draw instead of paint. But if you want it to look like little snowy gingerbread houses with icing, white paint is going to be the best thing. I did grab a little spare paper plate here that's going to be great for extra paint, or when we do some glitter as well, it can catch all the excess glitter. Okay, so to start, I've got my white paint here, and this is just like in a little paint pot that's really easy to dip your paintbrush into, but it's totally up to you if you want to squirt it out onto an extra scratch paper as well. And then we've got all different Creatology paintbrushes here. I think a pretty thin one works really well for a lot of these little details. So I'm going to use a thin brush, but not the tiniest one. I'm going to use this green one here to do the border first. And then this little teeny tiny detail brush will come in handy to do some extra little treatments as well. So I'm going to dip my paintbrush directly into my little paint pot here. And then I'm just going to paint along the border of the entire house. So I'm using the paintbrush to just kind of trace the entire thing. Again, other than cutting out the houses and stringing them together to make a garland, all of these details are totally up to you. So if you don't want to trace the border with paint, you don't have to. You can just decorate it. You could go right into adding little details. That is totally fine as well. We are going to go back to cutting out a few extra things out of cardboard, like little doors and a tree or two. But we want to get our paint going so that can start to dry, and then we can assemble our garlands together. And I think this little white border that we're painting together just kind of outlines the whole design. And again, looks like little icing to put together a gingerbread house. But you can make it as thin or as thick as you want to. I'm using a pretty thin brush, so my border isn't that thick. But you can definitely make it a little bit bigger if you want to as well. So there is our first little house all outlined. And I'm not painting the edges, I'm just painting the front of it. So if a little bit of paint got on there as you're painting, that's fine. You really can't even notice that. If you want to come back through and paint all the outer edges as well, or the back side, if you want it to be reversible, you can definitely do that once it dries. But for mine, I'm just painting the front, and I think that most garlands, a lot of times, will probably be hanging against your wall or, like I said, on a tree, so you don't have to worry about the back of it even being noticeable. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and paint the border of all three of our houses first, and then we'll go back in and do some details. As you can see, I'm dipping my paintbrush back into my paint every like couple inches that I paint. so that I'm not loading my brush too much, just getting enough on the tip of the brush bristles. But if you dip in too much or have a ton of paint, it becomes a little bit harder to manage the paintbrush. And that's when sometimes you can have paint spilling everywhere or be real globby, and then it takes a lot longer to dry as well. All right, so there's another little house with its white border. And then we're going to do our last one here.
You know what I just thought of that would be kind of a hack for
Yeah.
this? You know those what's it called? Liquid paper, but
Yes, you could
like
totally use like whiteout.
yes, white out, the ones that are like that have the little contraption that you like
Mm-hmm.
roll. I
Yeah,
think those could be that could be really easy to make the lines with as well.
that's a great idea. Yeah, you could absolutely use that. And you could just roll it right on along the edges, and you probably have like perfect little lines.
Yeah, for the perfectionists out there.
Good idea. All right, and I'm just gonna go overlapping, doing a second little coat on this one, just since a little bit of my black marker line is showing through the paint. If you're having the same thing, just do an extra coat of white paint and it will cover it right up. Okay, so now that we have outlined all of our little houses, next we're going to start adding some cute details in different ways. So it is totally up to you however many details you want to add. But I think what's helpful on some of these, I'm going to show some little examples here. Got a little house, little door here, and knowing where those little configurations might live, I think are helpful. So I think we can go ahead and cut out a couple extra little shapes to be doors, or if you want to add a little tree, like this one has an extra tree attached to it. Or where's my other little trees? You can also do little triangle trees. So let's cut out a couple extra shapes while the borders of these start to dry. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to set these aside. We're going to go back to painting as soon as we cut out some more shapes. So again, you don't have to use more cardboard if you don't want to. You could definitely use construction paper or just paint on your doors or your trees if you want to instead. Or you could also use even like a paper plate, something like that, that's going to be a little bit thicker, but not as thick. But if you want to draw, we're just going to freehand draw a couple little elements to add to our houses. So I'm going to do a little arch doorway. To do that, I'm just going to draw a straight line. And then I'm going to draw a second straight line. And I'm going to draw a little like half circle to connect those. You can also do a square or a rectangle door if you want to. So again, I'm going to draw 2 lines and then just a straight line across. And then if you want to draw a little tree, again, I had some little triangle trees. Once you paint it green, add some little sequins to adorn it. It's going to look like little Christmas trees. You can draw a couple different sizes. Again, you can draw any other type of shapes that you might want to add as well. We're going to cut out these. First little triangle. And then cutting out our little doorways here. I'm just cutting out 2 doors and I'm going to paint on a third one for my third house. But again, you can cut out as many as you might want, depending on how many houses you want to make for your garland. Okay, so now that we have a few of our additional shapes, we're going to paint these as well. And so you can use any color paint that you might want to use. In our little sample one, you probably saw lots of pinks and greens, but you could also do red and green for a traditional Christmas look if you want to, or maybe you want to do yellow or blue or pink. It's totally up to you. I'm going to do a little bit of red on this one together. So I'm going to paint one of my doors red. I'm going to take my paintbrush and just paint directly onto my little cardboard door.
Kathy says that a little bead for a doorknob would be cute. And that is so true.
So true. That's a great idea. Especially with all these different elements that we're going to glue together, kind of gives your houses some little 3-dimensional looks by having like the little door pop out and things like that. So another little thing that pops off the front sounds adorable. Okay, so I've got some red doors here for my 2 of my little houses. And then we can do our little trees here as well. You can also always mix colors. So say maybe you like a shade, but it's not exactly the shade you want to use. You can make it either darker or lighter. And so I'm going to pull some green paint out. And then add a little bit of white paint as well. And then we can blend those together to make a lighter green shade. Can always keep mixing. If you maybe wanted to go with a darker, you could add a little bit of brown to your green as well, and that would make it a little bit darker. Sometimes adding black can almost immediately make it turn into a gray, where brown will maybe give it a little bit more of like a foresty brown color. But I kind of like this little minty green shade is kind of fun. So we're going to paint our trees mint green. And again, that was a little bit of almost equal parts of my bright green and white. I'd say a little bit more white than green. Now we've got our little triangle trees and two of our doors painted there. We can let those dry. And we can start, we're gonna glue those on to two of our houses once they dry, but we can also start doing more decorative details now on our houses. So if you want to do little details around your doors and things like that, I'm going to wait to do that until we attach our new little red doors. But for instance, maybe this house, we're going to just paint a door on instead. And so I'm going to go back with my thin brush and I'm going to paint a little doorway. Maybe I'm going to paint a little window next to the door here. And again, we're not using templates for this portion, so it's totally up to you. You can paint any sort of little design as you want. You can see with the tip of my brush, the more pressure I put on my brush, it's going to grab a little cardboard you guys can see. As I put pressure on my brush, it's going to expand and make a thick line. But if I get paint on the edge of my brush, and you can see I've got a nice little pointed end there, if I just press lightly, I can do tiny little lines instead. So you can see there's the same exact brush that you're using to make very different size marks. And all that's going to be with how much pressure you put. So the more pressure you put, the thicker your line's going to be, and the less you're going to have little tiny lines. And so you can mix and match using the same brush. You can also switch to a smaller brush if you want to. Or you can just go nice and slow and just do soft little details. With gingerbreads, oftentimes there's little swirls and little stars or hearts all done in icing. And so you can do the same thing with your paintbrush and your paint and do small little swirl lines, almost like little S's. You can also practice some of these little designs if you want to first before you go on to the final cardboard piece. So you can grab an extra sheet of paper or maybe on your paper plate or your scratch sheet of paper you've been using to mix colors on, and you can easily practice a few times before you start. I also always like to kind of turn my item as I paint it. Rather than trying to move my arm around the item, it's much easier to shift the paper. And you can always add a bead like you suggested. That's a great idea. You do a little sequin, or I'm just going to paint a little doorknob on as well. And then another little detail that I think is fun on these is to add some little detail to your chimney. So I'm going to connect my diagonal line here so that I can define the chimney space. And then draw some more little lines to make it look like a little brick chimney. I'm just going to do little horizontal lines first. And I'm going to come back in and do a few vertical lines going through. But I'm not going to do exactly just straight up. I'm going to kind of go off center from each other so it looks more like little brick rather than a checkerboard. And the fun thing about doing these little gingerbreads is that they all are going to look different, and they're hand painted, has a fun handmade quality. So we're not necessarily attempting to get perfect lines. It's okay if they all look a little bit different. That makes them really cute. Draw a little heart and maybe a little extra curly cues coming off of here. All right. So that can be as simple or ornate as you want to go. You can add more details, but I think it's kind of fun that we're making multiple, that some of them have less color or less little details to them. So I'm gonna set this one aside as a finished item, let it dry, and then we'll start on the next one. So I've got my next one here, and I'm going to attach one of my little doors. So I'm going to just use my Elmer's glue here and just kind of do a little outline on the back. And then glue it directly on. If yours aren't dry yet, you might want to wait to attach it. And then we can add more details from here. So again, you can paint directly onto now your little painted door. Paint a little window on the front door. Do a little doorknob. Do some little windows. And this one, I think we're going to do a little snow-covered roof. So we're going to paint along the roof line and then cover in some glitter. Again, all these little details are totally optional. You don't have to use glitter. You don't have to do these same exact painted shapes that I'm doing. And do some little star designs. Okay, and now we're gonna do a little painted roof. And so to do that, you can draw a straight line if you want, but if you want to look sort of like it's a snowy line, I like to kind of do a more organic little swoopy marks. So just kind of making its own little line here. It's sort of like a loose scallop shape. And then from that little squiggly line we just drew across, we're going to paint that whole portion white. You can use the same brush, or you can always switch to a larger brush if you want to, for a larger area. And I'm then going to glitter this. So if you paint rather quickly, not so quick that you feel rushed and you make some mistakes necessarily, but if you paint rather quickly before all the paint dries, you can actually sprinkle the glitter directly onto the paint instead of having to add glue. But if you aren't done painting it and you want to do that, what you do is just sprinkle or smear your glue across the paint first and then add glitter. I'm just kind of quickly going over some of these big areas that less paint overlapped, just to give it a more opaque finish, and you can't see the cardboard through it. Okay, so now that my paint is still wet, I'm going to move these little shapes off of my paper plate here, and using my fine glitter. You can use any glitter that you might already have. It doesn't have to be the fine. I'm just going to open this side that has little holes so I can sprinkle it. And I'm just going to sprinkle directly onto my newly snowed roof line. And I'm just going to take the edge of my little house and kind of tap it onto your scratch paper. And then you can see it's a little harder on the camera to see, but you can see it leaves not only fun sparkle, but also even gives it a little bit more of a texture and makes it look really snowy. All right, so there is another finished little gingerbread house. We're going to move on to our third and last one that we're making together, and we're going to add some of these little details on first yet again. So I've got my little red door here. I'm going to squeeze some glue on the back and paste that on first. And I'm just putting my little door kind of right in the middle, but you can pick and choose whatever side you might want yours to go on. And then I'm going to add these little triangle trees as well to this one. And then I'm kind of going to overlap. Again, creating more of that three-dimensional element. And then again, we're going to add some fun details using our paint. just like we did a little sort of a brick design on this one's little chimney, you could do additional little brick look by just painting little rectangles. And you don't have to cover the entire thing to make it look like maybe it's a little older of a little cabin with just a little exposed brick. Or it just gives it the idea that it is a brick house without having to cover the whole thing in little rectangles. If you ever feel like you are having less control with your paintbrush, sometimes it might just have a little too much paint stuck inside. It just kind of wipe off the edges. You could do that on your scratch paper or a napkin as well. I'm just painting little rectangles to give the illusion of a little brick covered house. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to connect my diagonal line to define my little chimney. And then I'm just going to do little dots in this one. All right, so that might be all the painting detail that I need. But to finish this one off, I'm going to grab a little pipe cleaner here. You could do any style or color that you might want, whether you want to do metallic or anything else, but I'm gonna make a little wreath to put on my front door. And so to do that, I'm going to bend one edge of my little pipe cleaner into a little circle. I'm just going to kind of twist it together. Since it's wire, you can always go back in and straighten it out a little bit or make it a more perfect circle. I'm going to cut that off where I twisted it together. To make what looks like a little wreath here. And you can use a little bit of glue. And I'm taking a little embroidery floss. I'm going to tie this into a little bow. So just like you would tie your shoes, just going to tie a little bow. Cut off the extra here and then just add a little glue dot right in the center of the top of our new little wreath and stick that right on. There you have a tiny little wreath for your tiny little gingerbread house. Okay, so you can continue decorating these in 1,000 different ways. Like I said, you can definitely do little sequin details on your trees. You could paint or draw all sorts of designs. But the main thing at the end is you're going to string them all together into a garland. And to do that, we are going to be using a hole punch. And a hole punch, if you haven't used one before, are not very hard to use. Sometimes you just need some pressure. So I've got just a classic office style hole punch. You might have a fancy one if you are in a crafty family that is from scrapbooking or things like that as well. But just this basic hole punch works. So what we're going to do is put one edge of our little house and then just punch a hole right inside the border line. And we're going to do the same thing on both sides of the house. And I'm just kind of looking at how far down from this little edge, this little corner here, and just kind of eyeballing it on the other side, that's about the same size. Same amount of space down to make holes in both sides. We're gonna do the same thing on these as well. And if you want your garland, the bottoms of them all to kind of line up here, you can kind of set them next to each other and get a good idea of about where you want to put your holes. And then do the same thing with our third one here. So looking at kind of just drawing a line over right above this little window line. So now you've got all of your little houses have all their little hole punches in there. And we're going to use yarn to string them together. You can use any sort of twine. You could even use more of your embroidery thread if you use some of that to make little wreath details. And again, depending on how many houses you want to string together is going to depend on how much yarn you need. But I like to not always necessarily cut it first, but unravel a little bit, but don't cut it off of your entire yarn ball yet. Once you string it together, you can cut it at the end, and that way you know if you need more or less. I'm going to take one of my little plastic needles here, and I'm going to string my end of my yarn into the eye or the hole of the needle. Kind of push it through the hole and pull it through. And then I'm going to go from the front of it through my hole, and then go along the back and go back through the other hole on the other side of your house and pull your yarn across. And then this is where another optional step comes in if you want to add little wooden beads in between each house. And if you do, you're just going to push your needle directly through the bead and string it on. Sometimes I like to do like little clusters of 3. So I'm going to do like a smaller bead, a larger bead, and then another smaller bead. You can also paint the beads if you want to, whether metallic or white, or maybe you want to paint it red to match your doors or whatever colors you might have used. And then as I'm starting to pull this and my string's getting shorter, since I'm still connected to the entire yarn ball, I can just unravel a little bit more and push the whole thing down a little bit. And then we're going to go into the next house. So again, we're going to start from the front, go through the hole, and then your needle go along the back, through the other hole, and back out the front. And then we're going to string on 3 more beads. And as you do this, you can kind of lay it out. And I always like to kind of stretch my yarn so I can really see this distance in between so that I'm creating equal distance or approximately equal distance. So I can see like, okay, that looks about the same amount, and I'm stretching my yarn so I know that it's not going to move any further than that. Oop. And then I can go ahead and start stringing into the next house. I'm going to take my needle off. And then if you wanted to keep stringing more houses together, you would just keep doing the same steps. Or maybe you're making a smaller garland with only 3 houses today, then you can cut the end of your yarn away. And then what I like to do is create little loops on the ends, so it's really easy to hang. And also it's not all going to come off necessarily, so I like to kind of fold over my yarn end to make a little arch. Pinch that arch at the top. And then we're going to tie a knot. To make a little loop. Do that on the other side as well. A little extra, so I'm going to cut that off so that both of my ends here are about the same length. And I'm going to, again, kind of make a little arch shape here. Pinch that at the top. And then hold the 2 ends over here and tie a little knot. And there you have your own little gingerbread garland all ready to go. Again, you can keep adding as many houses as you might want or details, but just like that, you've made your own little gingerbread garland ready for the holidays, ready for winter. And I hope that you had just as much fun as I did crafting together today. And I can't wait to craft with you all holiday season. Thanks so much for joining me and Michael's, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks.